face and voice of Africa. The story of resurgent and burgeoning Africa is here, only on the Pulse of Africa channel. Pulse of Africa, the face and voice of Africa.
A very warm welcome to Pulse of Africa News. I am Magdalite Naga and I'm thrilled you're here with us. Let's start with Malawi. The government of Malawi is rolling out a mass child registration campaign targeting 4.6 million children under the age of 16 years. Minister of Homeland Security Peter Mukito announced Friday at a press briefing in Lilongwe. The minister said currently the targeted children have no legal identity documents and face barriers to essential services. With heightened risk of exploitation, statelessness, early marriage, child labor, child trafficking and exclusion from vital social economic opportunities. He added that the National Birth Registration Campaign will ensure that Malawi achieves the United Nations Sustainable Development Global Target, which calls upon every country to ensure legal identity for all, including birth registration by 2030. Until 2015, Malawi had been using Colonial Birth and Death Registration Act that was enacted in 1904, and it did not make birth registrations for Malawians mandatory. Consequently, most children born before 2015 were never registered and they have no birth certificates. However, the National Registration Act of 2010 made birth registrations mandatory for every child born in Malawi, regardless of the nationality of their parents, ethnicity, or religion, according to the minister. Since 2015, the National Registration Bureau, NRB, in Malawi has registered approximately 3.8 million children and newborns in the country health facilities and communities. The campaign will be held in 7 phases in health facilities and public primary schools, according to the minister. Chadian President Mohamed Idriss Deby and United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees Barham Mohamed Sahali exchanged views on Friday on the situations of refugees in charge. In a statement, the Chadian presidency said Mohamed Deby expressed concern that insufficient funding was placing Chad under an unsustainable financial and security burden. He said refugees now account for about 44% of the population in some eastern provinces, particularly Odai, Wadi Firia, Silia, and Ned East. The response must no longer be emergency assistance, but direct structural support for state infrastructure. Mohamed Deby was quoted as saying during the discussion. Sahali acknowledged the heavy burden placed on the Chadian government and host communities in welcoming refugees from South Sudan, from Central African Republic, Nigeria, Cameroon, and other countries. The statement said the issue of relocating refugee camps along the border was raised, with Deby urging the UNHCR to assume its share of the responsibility. Chad is Africa's leading host country for refugees, sheltering nearly 1.3 million people, according to the Chadian presidency. Deputy Secretary General for Political Affairs at the European External Action Service, EEAS, Olof Skog, has affirmed that the European Union stands ready to support Ethiopia in ensuring successful hosting of the upcoming COP32 climate conference. This statement came shortly after Skog held productive discussions with Ethiopian President Taye Asqaselase on Thursday. Speaking to Pulse of Africa following the meeting, Skog described in conversation as excellent and focused on strengthening collaboration between Ethiopia and the EU. I just had an excellent conversation with the President about the relationship between the European Union and Ethiopia. one which we believe has great promise, he remarked. Skoog highlighted strong alignment between the EU and Ethiopia on key climate priorities.
I think together with Africa, European Union is one of the leaders in terms of setting high ambition when it comes to the climate agenda, and also to protect the multilateral framework in which these negotiations take place. So there too, I think we see completely eye to eye with Ethiopia, and it was one of the areas that I have been discussing here today of further cooperation leading up to COP here in Ethiopia.
In addition to climate collaboration, Skoog expressed the EU's support for Ethiopia's ongoing economic reforms. He noted significant potential for expanded trade and investment ties, stating that Europe has something to contribute in terms of modern technology and sustainable ways of doing development and growing the economy. He specified references to the EU's Global Gateway Initiative, which promotes sustainable economic cooperation both within countries and across the region to foster green development and investment.
In Ethiopia, more homes and businesses now have access to electricity. Access to power supports education, healthcare, and local businesses. Light changes lives.
A new regular maritime link between the port of Marine di Carriera in Italy and Dejendejen in Algeria has been launched by Dairo Peroli Grandi Group and Kanan Medi. The service will operate on a monthly basis and will carry both RoRo and concentrated cargo. Michel Gramani, CEO of the Dario Peroli Group, underlined that service regulatory is essential to allow customers to plan trade flows efficiently, supported by a structured, commercial and consecutive approach for imports and exports to and from Algeria. The route will be operating using one of the RoRo vessels of Grandi Transport Marmiti. A new regular maritime link between the port of Marina di Carriera in Italy and Dejendejen in Algeria has been launched by Dairo Peroli Grandi Group and Kanan Medi. The service will operate on a monthly basis and will carry both RoRo and concentrated cargo. Michel Gromoni, CEO of the Dairo Peroli Group, underlined that the service regulatory is essential to allow customers to plan trade flows efficiently, supported by a structured, commercial and consultative approach for imports and exports to and from Algeria. The route will be operated using one of the RoRo vessels of Grandi Transport Maritime. A landmark global treaty to safeguard biodiversity in high seas came into effect today, providing countries with a legally binding framework to tackle threats such as overfishing and meet a target to protect 30% of the ocean environment by 2030. The UN treaty was finalized in March 2023 after 15 years of negotiations and will allow the creation of a global network of marine protected areas in vast and previously unregulated ocean ecosystems lying in international waters. It is 2/3 of the ocean and it is half of the surface of the planet that for the first time we will have a comprehensive legal regime, said Mr. Adam McCarthy, First Assistant Secretary at the Austrian Foreign Minister and co-chair of the treaty's preparatory committee. Speaking at a media briefing, the treaty reached the threshold of 60 national ratifications on September 9, 2025, meaning that it would go formally into operation within 120 days. Of the number of ratifications has since risen to more than 80, with China, Brazil and Japan adding their names to the list. Others, including Britain and Australia, are expected to follow soon. The United States signed the treaty during the previous administration but has not yet ratified it. While we only need for 60 enter into force, obviously, it is really critical for its implementation and for it to be as effective as possible for us to achieve global or universal ratifications of the treaty, said Ms. Rebecca Hubbard, director of the High Seas Alliance, a coalition of environmental groups. Shifting to our business headlines, we have Senegal raised 154 billion CFE francs, which is $254 million, in original debt action on Friday, as investors sought higher yields across all maturities. Data from Regional Debt Agency, UMOA, Tyre showed the Western African nation raised 7.46 billion CFA francs through a 12-month BAT treasury bill against beats totaling 87.14 billion CAFA francs. The weighted average yield stood at 6.96%, while the marginal rate was 6.92%, reflecting increasing short-term borrowing costs. Demand for longer-dated bonds was muted. A 36-month 080 Treasury bond attracted 65.89 billion CFA francs in beats, with nearly the full amount accepted at a weighted average yield of 7.28%. A 60-month 080 Treasury bond garnered 16.05 billion CFA francs in beats, which the Treasury fully retained. The bond cleared at a weighted average yield of 7.69%. The highest among the three instruments. Nigeria's Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, has introduced a significantly revised minimum capital framework for capital market operators, marking one of the most extensive regulatory overhauls in years. The new rules, issued in a circular on Friday, raise financial thresholds across multiple categories of market participants, aiming to strengthen market resilience and improve investor protections. Under the revised schedule of minimum capital requirements, many segments of the capital market will face sustainability, higher financial entry, and operating thresholds. Other affected groups include issuing houses with underwriting services, now required to maintain 7 billion naira, and clearing and settlement companies, which must hold 5 billion naira under the new framework. The SEC gave all affected entities until June 30, 2027 to meet the revised capital requirements. Firms that fail to meet the new thresholds within the period risk regulatory sanctions, including suspensions of operations for loss of registration. Regulators say the changes reflect a drive to align Nigeria's capital markets with global best practices and respond to evolving risks, especially in digital finance and fintech sectors. Finally, sport news. Marcus Goulet has become Manchester City's top defensive priority as the Premier League champions react swiftly to their growing problems at the back. Second in the league and weakened by a series of injuries, Pep Guardiola's side decided to act decisively with winter after investing €75 million in Anthony Semenyo, a move already delivering results. The citizens have now shifted their focus to defense. With Josko Gvardiol ruled out for the season, Ruben Dias sidelined and John Stones unavailable, City have accelerated their pursuit of Crystal Palace captain under contract until 2026. Guéhi is one of the most sought-after defenders in England, with Arsenal and Liverpool also monitoring his situation. However, Manchester City appeared determined to move faster than their rivals. Reports indicate that a significant contract offer has already been submitted to the 25-year-old, while an initial bid of around €35 million is being prepared for Crystal Palace. According to Sky Germany, an agreement in principle with player is already in place, highlighting City's intent to secure the deal quickly and reinforce their defense without delay. Let's take a look at the weather forecast across Africa. That's all for this hour. Before we wrap up, let me invite you to watch our weekly editorial. Watch is coming up next. Thank you for tuning in. Goodbye.
This is Editorial from Pulse of Africa, the voice and face of Africa.
The African Union has for quite some time been involved in mediating peace in places on the continent fraught with recurrent tensions or armed conflicts. Over the past couple of decades, the African Union tried to mediate peace in the Sahel, Somalia, South Sudan, Great Lake region, Sudan, Central African Republic, and Libya, among others. The Pan-African body's mediation record has been mixed, ranging from significant achievements in a few places to playing foundational roles in others. Some conflicts are old and getting complicated from decade to decade. A few are relatively new. All calls for a sense of immediacy to be solved, and the African Union must stand its ground against the weight of increasing foreign meddling that in most cases make conflicts more intricate. But challenges persist and conflict recur in some instances. Trumpet of war, long thought to be fading into history of post-colonial struggle, are sounding with a renewed rhythm at a few places in the continent. From the arid expanse of the Sahel to the volatile hinterlands of East Africa, a complex web of conflict is testing the very fabric of continental unity and security. While the challenge may in part find its cause to entrenched or emergent local misunderstandings, a new and pernicious element is actively sabotaging the path to peace. The resurgent interference of external powers whose strategic games are undermining local agency and setting the stage for a protracted era of instability. The Sahel region stands as the starkest epitome of this crisis. What began as a localized insurgency in northern Mali in 2012 has expanded into a Hydra-headed security nightmare spanning several countries. Jihadist groups have taken advantage of fragile state structures and local tensions, causing violence and forcing millions to flee their homes. The tragic spiral, however, was compounded by a series of developments that test constitutional way of doing things. Some novice administration, born of public frustration with former colonial powers, unsuccessful counter-terrorism missions have now pivoted violently away from Western partners. One external influence replaces another. The result is not security, but may lead to grim status quo of heightened violence and severing of regional cooperation. Simultaneously, East Africa grapples with its own existential fires. In Sudan, a catastrophic war of attrition between the National Army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces has turned Khartoum to rubble, spawned a displacement crisis, and at some places triggered famine. To the south, the conflict in the Democratic Republic of the Congo continues its decade-long torment. The resurgence of rebel groups has inflamed regional tensions to a boiling point. The Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo is a tragic testament to how internal fragility intersects with the strategic ambitions of external forces and the relentless exploitation of its mineral wealth by global networks, perpetuating a cycle of violence that local communities have borne for generations. At the heart of the continental response stands the African Union. Its founding principle, African Solutions to African Problems, represents the legitimate and essential strategic imperatives for sustainable peace. The African Union Peace and Security Council, alongside its diplomatic machinery, has been actively engaged in mediation, from hosting talks between Sudan's warring factions to supporting regional blocs like Economic Community of Western African States and the Eastern African Community. The operational challenges of its flagship African Standby Force are well known, but its moral and political authority as a broker remains indispensable. When it speaks with a unified voice, as it has in condemning unconstitutional change of government, it carries a legitimacy that external actors cannot replicate. Yet this authority is being systematically hollowed out. External interference is no longer a subplot, it is a central driver of destabilization. The Sahel has become a chessboard for a new scramble where external forces offer security for resources, fueling authoritarian governance and extrajudicial violence, while former Western partners scramble to retain influence, often through security approaches that have demonstrably failed. In the Horn of Africa, the Gulf and big powers rivalry and the competition for ports and military bases injects billions in arms and political support that deepen division within and between states. In the Great Lakes, the complex conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo is sustained by the economic and security interests of external forces, often with the tacit and at times explicit backing of global powers seeking strategic allies. This external meddling is catastrophically destructive. First, it undermines regional stability by empowering factions that are accountable not to their people, but to their foreign patrons, making conflict more intractable. Second, it weakens and discredits local solutions. Why should a rebel leader heed the African Union's painstaking diplomacy when a phone call from a foreign capital can offer weapons and political cover? These parallel tracks of diplomacy create confusion, offer warring parties alternative avenues, and fatally weaken cohesive peace initiatives. Finally, it threatens long-term continental security by transforming local political disputes into proxy conflicts. This not only prolongs sufferings but also entrenches the very conditions, terrorism, criminal networks, mass displacement, that ultimately spill over borders and threaten global security. The continent needs a reaffirmation of the principle of subsidiarity, where regional bodies lead, supported by the African Union, and the international community provides aligned, predictable, and non-prescriptive support. This requires African states to find a more united, principled voice to demand that external partners respect African Union-led processes. It also demands that African leaders look inward, address the governance vacuums that invite interference, and invest in the political and economic inclusion of their youth. The path to peace emanates from the will and rights of the peoples of Africa to live in peace and harmony. Imposed peace coming from the capitals of outside of the continent has failed. We have been cooperating with genuine external peace efforts, but all efforts must be African-led.
This is Editorial from Pulse of Africa, the voice and face of Africa.